fungi, we had discussed various salient features coming under this kingdom. We had discussed the habitat, the types of mycelia, whether it is aseptate or septate. We had also discussed the various modes of reproduction these species belong to, that is vegetative, asexual and sexual mode of reproduction. Also, we had discussed that this is the unique kingdom follow heterotrophic mode of nutrition. And then we had discussed that there are certain fungi that are very useful for antibiotic production. Also, there are some fungi that are edible, some are poisonous, some are parasitic on plants as well as animals. Right? So today we will discuss the major classes coming under kingdom fungi. So altogether there are 4 classes: PHYCOMYCETES, ASCOMYCETES, BASIDIOMYCETES and DEUTEROMYCETES. Now all these 4 classes were made based on the morphology of mycelia. Morphology is the how the mycelia looks like, whether it is septate, branched or aseptate. Okay. Second was based on mode of spores that they form. And third is the type of fruiting body that are formed, in which or on which the spores are borne. Okay. So today we will discuss in detail regarding all these 4 subclasses. The first one is PHYCOMYCETES, that is the lower fungi. Now in some of the fungal species, the sexual reproduction is not known. So what we will do, we will divide kingdom fungi as 2 different types. The species where sexual reproduction is known and the species where the sexual reproduction is not known. So there are 2 types of fungi. Under sexual reproduction, that is the species that are known. Again we will divide into 2 types, that is the Oomycota and Eumycota. Oomycota are the lower fungi and Eumycota are the higher fungi. Okay? And the species where we do not know the sexual reproduction, these fungi are called as imperfect fungi. Under Oomycota, that is the lower fungi, is the PHYCOMYCETES. Okay? So PHYCOMYCETES are lower fungi indicate that these were the first organism of kingdom fungi to be evolved from protistum. Okay? So they usually live in aquatic condition as well as they can be in terrestrial form on decaying wood, moist and damp places. They are also obligate parasite on plants. Now what do we mean by obligate parasite? The parasite or some of the fungal species, they require a host, a living host, wherein they can continue their life cycle. So if that host is not there, they cannot complete their life cycle. So these species are called as obligate parasites. About the cell structure, mycelia is aseptate. That means there are no cross walls that are present. So therefore, these mycelia will look like a tube having many nuclei. So therefore, it is multinucleated. So this mycelia is called as cenocytic mycelia. Reproduction occurs in 3 different modes: vegetative, asexual and sexual mode of reproduction. The fragmentation occurs wherein the hyphae of the fungi will divide into several fragments, and then each fragment will give give rise to new fungal body. Okay. Asexual reproduction occurs through three different types of spores: zoospores, aplanospores and sporangiospores. We should recall that zoospores are formed in the fruiting body called as zoosporangia, wherein the zoospores are formed and they are flagellated. Aplanospores are also formed in zoosporangia, but these aplanospores are non-motile type. Sporangiospores are formed in the fruiting body called as sporangia. When the sporangia will rupture, the numerous spores, sporangiospores that are formed inside it will be liberated through air current, and each spore will give rise to new organism. There are some fungal species coming under Phycomycetes wherein the sporangia looks like conidia, but these are the sporangia having sporangiospores. Okay, these are not conidia. Okay. In sexual reproduction, we should remember that it follows plasmogamy, that is the fusion of protoplast, then karyogamy, that is the fusion of nuclei, and then once the zygote is formed, that will undergo meiotic division to release spores. And the gametes that are involved here, they can be motile or non-motile. Most of the species will follow this plasmogamy, karyogamy and meiotic division. Okay, so that we should remember when we are speaking about sexual mode of reproduction. So here the sexual spores that are formed are called as oospores and zygospores. Oospores, wherein there are two gametangia, antheridia and oogonia, they come closer to each other, and the male gamete from the antheridia will be released into oogonia, wherein the fusion will take place and the cell that will be formed will undergo meiotic division to release the oospores. Zygospore is formed by the fusion of the gametangia. Here the two hyphae having different strains, so that's why it is written as positive and negative, that are two different hyphae coming closer to each other, and there will be fusion of gametangia. But here there is some peculiarity wherein after the fusion of the gametangia, there will be the zygospore that will be formed, and this zygospore is diploid, and later on this zygospore will develop into the fungal body, and that will bear the spores after undergoing meiotic division. Okay. So the method what we have discussed is either gametangial contact or gametangial conjugation or copulation or fusion of gametangia that we had seen. The gametes can be either isogamous, that means both male and female gametes look similar, okay, morphologically, externally, with respect to their structure and size. They can be anisogamous, wherein the female gamete will be larger in size compared to the male gamete, and oogamy, wherein the female gamete is very much bigger in size compared to male gamete. Okay. So the gametes can be isogamous, anisogamous or oogamous. So there are three examples of Phycomycetes: black bread mold called as rhizopus, dung mold that is mucor, and the white crust called as albugo that affects the mustard plants. So they are parasitic to these plants. So how to remember this? We can make the short form as RAM, rhizopus, albugo and mucor. Okay. So there are other species too, but in our textbook only these three names are been mentioned. Next is ASCOMYCETES. Those are the higher fungi coming under Eumycota. Okay. So under Eumycota there are two types. First we'll write down as ASCOMYCETES, that is also called as sect fungi, as they have sect-like structures. Okay. So here again habitat, they are present in moist or damp places. They are saprophytic. Most of them are decomposers. They are parasitic. Okay. And also some of these species are coprophilous. Coprophilous are those fungi that grow on the dung, okay, or excreta of animals. Okay. These organisms are multicellular, except the species called as yeast Saccharomyces is unicellular. The mycelia is branched and it is septate. PHYCOMYCETES we had discussed, it is aseptate. These species are septate. That means there are cross walls that are present and they are multicellular. And each cell will have one nucleus. Okay. The reproduction in ASCOMYCETES is through vegetative type, asexual as well as sexual. We know what is budding, wherein the parental cell will give rise to a small bud, and that bud will get detached from the parental cell and give rise to an individual. Asexual mode of reproduction is through conidia. We can see here there are many conidia which are born on the hyphae, and that hyphae we call it as conidiophore. Okay, so these are the conidia which are placed exogenously, that is on the hyphae. Okay. Sexual reproduction occurs through spores called as ascospores, and these ascospores are formed in the structure called as ascus. So there are many asci that will be formed in the fruiting body called as ascocarp. So each fruiting body will have many asci, and each ascus will have ascospores present inside them. So therefore these spores are endogenous. Okay. We should also recall that these spores are formed after meiotic division. Okay. Then there can be gametangial contact, where the male gamete will be released into the oogonia and fusion will take place, or there can be fusion of cells. Okay. So here the hyphae can come closer to each other and the fusion will take place. We had discussed this in the salient features of kingdom fungi, wherein the two hyphae will come closer to each other, right? And they will form a structure, that is the cell having two nuclei. The cell having these two nuclei is called dikaryotic cell, and the condition we call it as dikaryon, and the phase is called as dikaryophase. We had also discussed that this dikaryophase in such ASCOMYCETES and BASIDIOMYCETES, it will prolong for many generations, right? And then karyogamy will take place. Okay. So the examples here are aspergillus that attack food stuff, but various antibiotics and enzymes can be extracted from this fungi. Penicillium notatum, that is one of the important fungi for the antibiotic production, and that is penicillin. Okay. Then there is neurospora, which is used as genetical studies. Saccharomyces, that is the yeast, also called as baker's and brewer's yeast, that is useful for bread making as well as the alcoholic beverages. Then there are some parasitic fungi called as claviceps that usually causes ergot in the cereals, most of the cereals, but they are also useful in some medicinal purpose. Then there are some edible ascocarps. Okay, so these are morels and truffles, also called as buffles, which are very expensive. Okay, because they are rarely found. But how to remember all these names? Okay, so we can prepare or make a sentence. As per set, new pen truffles writes more clear. That means Aspergillus, Saccharomyces, Neurospora, Penicillium, truffles, morels and clear is claviceps. Okay, so this way we can remember these names, as all these names are mentioned in the textbook. The third type is Basidiomycetes. So we have already discussed about PHYCOMYCETES, ASCOMYCETES. So next is Basidiomycetes. Okay. This is also called as club fungi. They are present in soil, on the wooden logs, or on the tree stumps we can see, and also some of them are parasite on the plants. Okay, the mycelium here is branched and septate like Ascomycetes. In Basidiomycetes, there are no asexual spores that are found. So the reproduction occurs in two different means: vegetative and sexual mode of reproduction. In vegetative reproduction, it occurs through fragmentation. We already know by now what do we mean by fragmentation. Sexual spores that are formed here called as basidiospores. And here there are no sex organs too that are found. Okay, that means there cannot be any gametangia such as antheridia or oogonia. So therefore there cannot be any fusion between the two gametangia or the contact between the two gametangia. So here the spores that are formed are basidiospores that are formed on the fruiting body called as basidiocarp. So there are many gills that are formed inside, and on these gills there will be these basidia will be formed, many basidia, and on these each basidium there will be basidiospores that will be formed exogenously. Okay, since they are present on the basidium. Okay, so here too there will be plasmogamy, then dikaryophase and karyogamy. We have already discussed about it. There will be the fusion of both the hyphae of different strain, and there will be plasmogamy. After plasmogamy, there will be phase called as dikaryophase, wherein there will be two nuclei inside one cell, and this will be prolonged for many generations as we had discussed earlier, and then followed by karyogamy. So the different examples that are mentioned in the textbook are mushrooms that are edible. One of the example is agaricus. Then some are parasitic on the plants, such as Puccinia, that we see the disease called as rust on the wheat and other plants. Then bracket fungi that is usually grown on the wooden logs or tree stumps. One of the example we can take as polyporus. Another parasitic fungi that causes smut in the maize plant and other cereals called as astilago. Then there are puffballs that are edible at young stage. One of the example is lycoperdon. There are certain fungi that is poisonous. They look very beautiful. One of the example is amanita. So again, how to remember all these species? In the NCERT textbook, they have mentioned agaricus, Puccinia and astilago. But then in the theory, it is mentioned about bracket fungi, puffballs and poisonous fungi too. So therefore, we have to remember all those names. So I have taken polyporous, amanita and lycoperdon, belonging to bracket fungi, poisonous fungi and puffballs. Okay. So here we will remember as up to likes amanita. A stands for agaricus, P is polyporous, next P is Puccinia, U is Astilago, likes is lycoperdon, amanita is the beautiful fungi but it is poisonous. So this way we can remember all the species coming under Basidiomycetes. The last class is Deuteromycetes, which is also called as imperfect fungi since the sexual reproduction is not known. So this is the last one, Deuteromycetes. Okay. So most of the species are decomposers coming under Deuteromycetes. They also help in mineral cycling, and some of them are saprophytes and parasitic in nature. Here the mycelia is septate and branched. That means there are cross walls that are present. So therefore it will be multicellular. So here reproduction occurs through asexual mode of reproduction and vegetative mode of reproduction. Vegetative reproduction can take place through fragmentation, and asexual reproduction occurs through the various types of conidia that are formed on the hyphae. Okay, so they are exogenous spores that are formed here. So in this class, all those species whose sexual reproduction is not known are placed in this Deuteromycetes. Once the sexual mode of reproduction will be known, accordingly they will be placed in the other classes, say ASCOMYCETES or Basidiomycetes. So definitely they are not coming under the lower fungi. Okay. So the examples here are Coleotrichum, which cause red rot in sugar canes. We can see here these are the red color that we can see inside the sugar cane. Then another example is Alternaria, that is blight of potato as well as tomato is the disease. And the third one is Trichoderma. This species is also useful to prepare biofungicide. So it is biologically helpful to eradicate the fungal diseases. Okay. So here we can remember Deuteromycetes all species as tri, alter and col. That is Trichoderma, Alternaria and Coleotrichum. So here we have discussed the 4 different classes coming under kingdom fungi. Okay. And these are the various examples coming under PHYCOMYCETES, Ram, ASCOMYCETES as per said you pen truffles write more clear. Then under Basidiomycetes up to likes amanita, and for Deuteromycetes tri, alter and col. So this way we can remember all the species. Okay. So based on the mycelia, mode of spores formation and also the fruiting bodies, we can easily differentiate between all the 4 different classes of kingdom fungi. So we have seen PHYCOMYCETES is aseptate, whereas all other 3 classes have septate mycelium. Then we have discussed about vegetative reproduction occurs in all the classes, but in ASCOMYCETES there is budding too. For example, in yeast, budding takes place. Then sexual mode of reproduction. In PHYCOMYCETES there is the production of oospores and zygospores, indicate that there is gametangial contact and there is the gametangial fusion that takes place. Whereas in ASCOMYCETES there are gametangia found, so there is gametangial contact is present but there is no fusion as such. Then the spores that are formed in ASCOMYCETES are ascospores, and these are formed in SI or ascus inside the structural body, and the fruiting body is called as ascocarp. In Basidiomycetes, there are no sex organs, Entheridia or Muconia, but there are basidiospores that are formed exogenously on the basidium, and these basidia are formed on the fruiting body called as basidiocarp. Whereas in imperfect fungi or Deuteromycetes, there is no sexual reproduction that is known as yet. Regarding asexual mode of reproduction, there are zoospores, aplanospores, then sporangiospores that are formed in the fruiting bodies in PHYCOMYCETES. Also, some of the species have chlamydospores and oidea, which is not mentioned in the NCERT textbook, okay, of 11th standard. Then in ASCOMYCETES, there are conidia that are formed. There are no such asexual spores that are formed in Basidiomycetes, whereas in the Deuteromycetes, there are the conidia that are formed here. So this way we can differentiate between all the four classes. Okay. So if we consider the difference between kingdom Protista and fungi, we see that the Protistan are unicellular eukaryotes, whereas fungi are the multicellular eukaryotes. There is the presence of cellulose in the cell wall of Protista, whereas here there is the presence of chitin. Then nutrition, when we speak about, it is autotrophic as well as heterotrophic mode of nutrition in kingdom Protista, and fungal species are unique kingdom with heterotrophic mode of nutrition. Reproduction, when we speak about, there is asexual reproduction through fission and cyst formation. Sexual reproduction occurs through conjugation and syngamy. Whereas in kingdom fungi, there is vegetative reproduction, and we have seen different modes of vegetative reproduction, say for example sclerotium, then rhizomorph, or we can say fragmentation, budding and fission, etc. Okay? Asexual mode of reproduction occurs through spores formation, and sexual reproduction occurs through gametes or gametangia or hyphae. So that is the difference that what we can see. One thing we have to remember here, that regarding the kingdom Protista, the individuals or the organisms, they can be either haploid or diploid. Okay? Whereas in kingdom fungi, we had seen that the species are all haploid, whether they are gamete or it is the hyphae or the fungal body, it is haploid, right? So in kingdom Protista, they can be either haploid or diploid. When we speak about haploid, means it has half the number of chromosomes, whereas diploid, there will be two sets of chromosomes. We should remember that these two sets of chromosomes are obtained when the chromosome of two parents is present in this organism. Okay? And the haploid organisms are those which will have only one set of chromosomes. Okay? So in kingdom Protista, suppose the organism is haploid, already haploid in nature, that means they have only one set or half the number of chromosomes, they will undergo mitotic division to give gametes. So since it is mitosis, the gametes will be exactly similar to the parent. So the gametes are haploid here. Okay? Why? Because already the organism is haploid. So they will undergo mitotic division to release haploid gametes. Whereas the diploid organism, since they have two sets of chromosomes, they will undergo meiotic division and they will release the gametes that are haploid. Okay? So since it is already diploid, it will undergo meiotic division in order to release haploid gametes. So whether it is haploid organism or diploid organism, the gametes will be always haploid. The union between the two gametes will give rise to diploid cell, right? And this diploid cell will undergo meiosis. Okay? And when it undergo meiosis, the spores that will be formed will give rise to an organism. Okay? Whereas in the organism which is already diploid, so here the union between the two gametes will give rise to diploid zygote or diploid cell, and this organism. So that we have to remember here. In kingdom Protista, the organism can be haploid or diploid. But gametes that are found will be always haploid in nature. Whereas in kingdom Fungi, all the organisms are the haploid one. So therefore, there the plasmogamy between the haploid gamete or haploid hyphae or the gametanthia which takes place, karyogamy will take place. That is a fusion of nuclei, and the zygote will be always diploid here. Okay, after the fertilization, and that zygote will undergo meiotic division to release sexual spores, and that sexual spores will give rise to a new organism, that is the fungal species. Okay. So this was regarding the 4 classes of kingdom fungi. We have also seen the difference between the 4 classes and also between the 2 kingdoms. And since we already know about kingdom Monera, so we can differentiate between kingdom Monera, kingdom Protista and kingdom